Well, hello there, and welcome to Old Retold. I'm your host, Sammy, here to do what your high school English teacher never dared: cut the fluff, ditch the homework, and show you why these old stories still pack a punch. With more sarcasm, less suffering. This is Old Retold, where dusty classics get dragged out of the attic, shaken free of mothballs, and given a cheeky once-over. The story we are exploring centres around a vampire, the lesser-known one, but the OG nevertheless, way before Dracula took centre stage with his cape and dodgy accent. Her name's Carmilla. She crept onto the page in 1872 from the pen of Irish writer Sheridan Le Fanu, a man who practically lived in the fog of Gothic tales. Le Fanu specialised in haunted houses, whispered legends, and things that go bump when you're trying to get a decent night's sleep. And with Carmilla, he gave us one of literature's first proper vampires. Unlike Dracula, Carmilla doesn't faff about turning into bats or doing dramatic, I want to suck your blood impressions. She's sly, seductive, unsettling, the quiet guest you invite in, who ends up rearranging your entire life while draining the energy out of you. It's Gothic, it's eerie, and it's got just the right amount of, hang on, did that just happen? Moments. And don't worry, I'll be steering you through the creepy forests, drafty castles, and suspicious fainting fits, sprinkling in a bit of humour to keep your torch lit. So, buckle up. This is Old Retold retell of Carmilla, the vampire tale that started it all. Our story begins in the gloomy forests of Styria, that bit of Austria where the trees are so thick and the castles so drafty you'd swear they were built purely for vampire activity. Mind you, I myself had to Google that one. Geography is not my strong suit. And of course, tucked away in one of these castles is her heroine, Laura. Not a bad setup for Gothic drama, is it? You can't have a vampire tale starting in a cheerful bungalow. Now Laura, she's looking back on her life years later, and you get the sense straight away she's still a little traumatised. And no wonder. From the time she was a child, things in her life were already leaning heavily towards the creepy. She lived with her father, who, to be fair, was a kind enough man. A widower, bookish, fond of family history and old manuscripts, but he wasn't exactly what you'd call lively company. The man's idea of a good night out was probably reorganising his library. So there's Laura, an only child, rattling around a castle with servants and governesses, no playmates, no neighbours near enough to call friends. Imagine growing up where the only social interaction you get is with people who are paid to be polite to you. It's no wonder she read novels and daydreamed herself silly. You'd have to, or you'd go mad staring at the wallpaper. And then, when she was only 6 years old, the first proper scare came. One night she wakes up to find a woman in her room, not just any woman, a strikingly beautiful one. You'd expect Laura to scream or call for help, but she just sort of lies there, too shocked to do much. The woman slides into bed beside her, as casually as you like, and wraps her arms around her. Now, at first it feels almost comforting, and little Laura drifts towards sleep. But suddenly there's a sharp pain right in her chest, like something biting down, and she screams. And just like that, the woman vanishes. Come morning, she tells the adults. Do they investigate? Of course not. They shrug it off, pat her on the head and say, just a bad dream, classic Gothic parenting. Your kid wakes up screaming about a mysterious woman trying to bite her. And the response is basically, well, don't eat cheese before bed next time. But Laura never forgot it. She carried that memory with her for years. The beauty of the woman, the strange mixture of fear and comfort, the sharp pain. And she says herself, looking back, that she should have realised what it meant. But she was only a child, alone in a castle, with no one to believe her. And that, friends, is where the shadow first fell across Laura's life. Not with fangs and coffins just yet, but with a 6-year-old's dream that wasn't a dream at all. By the time Laura reached 19, life hadn't exactly picked up. Same castle, same forest, same dad buried in his books. She's old enough now to really feel the isolation. No siblings, no neighbours, no friends, unless you count governesses who rotate through the place like temporary furniture. It was just her father, and the long corridors echoing with nothing but her own footsteps. The castle itself was the kind of place you might call picturesque if you were a tourist with a fondness for ruins. For Laura, it was just home, and home was lonely. She had novels to read and daydreams to fill her head, but the truth is she was starved of company. You can sense it in the way she tells the story. She's practically begging for something, anything, to break up the boredom. Imagine being 19 and the highlight of your week is when the post brings your dad another genealogy chart. No wonder she was ready to welcome in trouble with open arms. One evening, Laura and her father went out for their usual stroll, a bit of fresh air before bedtime, because in those days that was about as wild as your nightlife got in rural Austria. As they walked under the trees, they heard the clatter of wheels on the road. A carriage appeared, drawn by 4 horses, moving far too quickly for such a narrow track. Sure enough, it swerved. There was a loud crack, and down it went. A full accident, right there in front of their castle. Naturally, Laura and her father hurried over, servants in tow, to see what could be done. Out of the wreckage stepped a lady, dressed richly, clearly someone important, in a state of high agitation. Beside her in the carriage lay a young girl, pale, unconscious, as if struck by a fainting fit. Laura's father, being the gentleman he was, insisted they come inside the castle to recover. But the lady refused. She was on urgent business, she said, could not possibly delay. Her daughter, however, was in no state to travel further that night. She begged, almost desperately, for Laura's father to let the girl remain under his care until she could return for her. Now, if that happened today, you'd smell a rat immediately. So you've crashed your carriage, your kid's collapsed, and you've got urgent business. Aye, right, pull the other one. But because this is Gothic Austria, hospitality's the rule. If a stranger drops off their fainting daughter, you don't ask questions. You set up the guest room. Perfect vampire conditions, really. Laura, for her part, could barely hide her excitement. She'd spent 19 years starved of companionship. And now, here was a girl her own age, beautiful even in her swoon, about to become her guest. It felt like a gift, an answer to a silent longing she'd carried for years. Her father, after a little hesitation, agreed. The lady swept off into the night, leaving the girl in their care, and promised to return in 3 weeks. The girl's name was Carmilla, and that, dear listeners, is how the whole dark business truly begins. From the moment Carmilla settled into the castle, Laura's life changed. Here, at last, was a companion her own age, someone to talk to, laugh with, confide in. She'd waited 19 years for it, and suddenly it was handed to her in the shape of this mysterious, beautiful guest. The castle, once silent and lonely, was now full of conversation and companionship. Laura found herself drawn more and more into Carmilla's orbit, even as the oddities piled up. She could not have known it then, but every embrace, every whispered word, was pulling her further into a shadow she would soon struggle to escape. Carmilla was, without doubt, striking. Dark hair, pale skin, eyes that seemed to flash with some secret thought. She carried herself like someone who'd seen far more of the world than a sheltered girl in Styria ever had. And she knew it too. She had a way of walking into a room, as though she'd been living there all along. Her arrival in the castle was like throwing open a window in a house that had been shut up for years. For Laura, it was nothing short of a revelation. After a lifetime of governesses, servants, and her father's dry lectures about family trees, she suddenly had a companion her own age, a friend, someone to laugh with, talk with, share secrets with. It was like water to a plant that had been wilting in the shade. At first, Laura could hardly believe her luck. She was thrilled to have a friend, and Carmilla was quick to shower her with affection. She would sit close, hold her hand a little longer than was strictly necessary, and look at her with eyes so intense Laura sometimes didn't know where to put herself. Now, bear in mind, this is 19th century Austria. Young ladies weren't exactly supposed to fling themselves into one another's arms. But Carmilla? She leaned in, whispered endearments, even kissed Laura on the cheek with a kind of fervour you'd normally reserve for a fiancé. It was a lot. Let's just say the undertone was there, even if no one said it out loud, and Laura, poor girl, was caught between delight and discomfort. On one hand, she was overjoyed to be the focus of such warmth and attention. She'd been starved of it all her life. On the other, something about Carmilla's intensity unsettled her. She sometimes felt a chill when Carmilla pressed too close or whispered that she loved her beyond life itself. It was flattering, thrilling, and just a little frightening. Let's be honest, this connection in today's standards had all the classic vibe of a dodgy relationship. Half of Laura is thinking, this is amazing, I've never felt so alive. The other half's thinking, there's something off here, and why does she never eat at mealtimes? And I'm sure every listener right now is thinking, red flags, Laura, red flags everywhere. Run, girl. If she had socials, they'd be blowing up with reels titled, How to Spot a Toxic Relationship. Meanwhile, Carmilla, the overstayed house guest, struts about. Sleeps late, avoids religion, dodgy backstory, a bit too handsy. It's the 19th century version of dating someone who says they don't have social media. But of course, Laura, bless her, saw none of it. She was 19, lonely and flattered. And well, sometimes that's all it takes to ignore the fangs lurking in the background. So Laura is basking in the warmth of this new friendship, even as a chill occasionally crept over her. She couldn't have known that each embrace, each whispered word of devotion, was not just affection, but a chain slowly tightening around her life. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. Laura began to feel unwell, not all at once, but slowly, like a candle burning down too fast. She complained of weariness, of feeling faint and restless. The nights brought no peace. Again and again, she dreamed of a figure at her bedside, a dark shape that pressed against her, heavy and suffocating, leaving her trembling and drained by morning. And she wasn't alone in this. Beyond the castle walls, whispers crept in from the villages nearby. Young girls were falling ill, pale and weak, wasting away from some mysterious sickness. They complained of bad dreams too, a creature pressing down on their chest, stealing their breath in the dead of night. Doctors muttered and wrung their hands, utterly baffled. And in classic Gothic medicine fashion, the best they could muster was, we've no idea what's wrong. But have you tried leeches? Because, of course, when in doubt, slap a slimy vampire worm on someone's face and call it science. That was cutting-edge healthcare in the 19th century. Meanwhile, the villagers were saying what everyone was really thinking. This isn't anemia, mate. Something's stalking the girls at night. Old women clutched their rosaries, whispered of vampires, and crossed themselves whenever the wind howled through the forest. Fathers barred the windows, mothers burned candles, and everyone slept a little less soundly, waiting for the next daughter to take ill. Spoiler, they were not wrong. This wasn't a random flu season, or bad soup, or too much reading by candlelight. Something with fangs was moving quietly through the countryside, and it wasn't about to stop at the village gates. Through all this, Carmilla remained as devoted to Laura as ever, perhaps even more so. She hovered over her, stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort, insisting she loved her beyond life and death. To Laura, half frightened and half enchanted, it was both balm and burden. She admits she felt torn, thrilled to be so cherished, yet chilled by the strange intensity of it. And Carmilla wasn't exactly shy about expressing it either. At one point, she tells Laura, "You are mine, you shall be mine, and you and I are one forever." Now, depending on how you hear it, that's either very touching or very worrying. It's not just affection, it's ownership. This wasn't just kindness, it was the slow drip of emotional pressure. Whenever Laura seemed uneasy, Carmilla doubled down with more affection, more reassurances, more declarations that her world would end without Laura. It's the 19th century version of love bombing, overwhelming someone with attention until they feel too guilty or too bound up to step back. Laura, who had grown up lonely and isolated, was the perfect target for it. She was starved for connection, and Carmilla knew it. And so she became both the comfort Laura longed for and the source of her unease, which meant escape felt almost impossible. While the villagers, and Laura herself, wasted away, Carmilla herself grew no paler, no weaker. Quite the opposite. She seemed more radiant each day, her dark eyes shining, her step as graceful as ever. She joined Laura only late in the mornings, claiming fatigue, and avoided the company of others whenever she could. Her dislike of prayers grew sharper. She excused herself more and more often, as though the very sound of them grated on her nerves. Then came the moment that sealed Laura's unease. One night, she woke from another suffocating dream, the sense of something pressing against her chest, of lips burning her skin. And in the half-light, she thought she saw Carmilla standing at the foot of her bed, gazing at her with those same burning eyes. She blinked, and the vision was gone. By morning, Carmilla was all gentleness again, full of affection and concern. If you or I woke up to find our best friend lurking at the end of the bed at 2 a.m, that'd be the end of the friendship, wouldn't it? Pack your bags, Carmilla. You're off my Netflix account. But poor Laura, with her sheltered upbringing, just chalked it up to nerves, which, to be fair, is easy to do when the person unsettling you is also the only one making you feel loved. Meanwhile, the news from the surrounding countryside grew grimmer. Another girl had died, pale, wasted, gone in weeks, and another. The rumours of a vampire plague swirled louder. But inside the castle, with Carmilla's hand clasping hers and her father dismissing the talk as superstition, Laura remained caught in a web of fear and fascination. She couldn't yet see it, but her strength was fading day by day. And Carmilla, beautiful, mysterious Carmilla, seemed to glow brighter the weaker Laura became. By this time, Laura's health was slipping badly. She looked pale, moved slowly, and no amount of tonics or doctors' fussing seemed to help. Her father grew anxious, but he kept trying to convince himself it was just one of those passing ailments. After all, doctors in Styria weren't exactly famous for their insight. If you weren't bleeding from the head, they usually just told you to rest and drink broth. Or leeches, always leeches. Because nothing says sound medical practice like sticking a slug with teeth on your face. It was then that a visitor arrived at the castle, General Spielsdorf. He was an old family friend, grey, serious, the sort of man who carried a permanent air of tragedy about him, and with good reason. When he sat down with Laura's father, he told a tale that made Laura's blood run cold. Some months earlier, the general had been guardian to a young girl named Bertha, his ward and dear companion. Into their household had come, by accident, or so it seemed, a young lady, beautiful, charming, and in need of shelter. Bertha and this stranger became inseparable, their bond swift and intense. But soon after, Bertha began to fall ill. The symptoms were the same as Laura's: pallor, weakness, nightmares. Doctors muttered, priests prayed, but nothing helped, and then Bertha died. The general was shattered. But he also uncovered enough hints, whispers, suspicions, fragments of truth, to convince him his ward had not died of natural causes. She had been preyed upon, drained, destroyed. The mysterious young visitor had vanished soon after, and in her place the general found only grief and fury. He swore that if ever he saw her again, he would destroy her. As the general spoke, Laura's heart pounded, for the girl he described sounded uncannily like Carmilla. The beauty, the charm, the intensity of her affection, and the death that followed. It was as though the general had looked into Laura's own life and described it piece for piece. You'd think at this point the penny would finally drop, wouldn't you? Same mysterious guest, same strange illness, same pattern of girls wasting away. It's like watching a horror film where the characters refuse to put the torch on. You're yelling, "It's her! She's the vampire!" But no one in the castle quite dares to say it out loud. Carmilla, of course, denied nothing, because she wasn't there when the general told his tale. She stayed away, languid as ever, claiming fatigue. And Laura, torn between the joy of her affection and the horror of the general's words, found herself more bewildered than ever. The castle, once lonely but safe, now felt like the stage for some dreadful drama. The pieces were all there: the dreams, the weakness, the deaths, the general's story. But still the truth hovered just out of reach, like a shadow that wouldn't quite step into the light. The general's story hung over the castle like a thundercloud. Laura could hardly breathe for the fear of it. The girl he described, the mysterious visitor who befriended and drained his ward, was Carmilla. There could be no mistake. And yet, when Carmilla looked at her with those burning eyes, or pressed her lips to her hand and whispered devotion. Laura could not reconcile the two pictures. Could the gentle friend who professed such love truly be the same creature the general vowed to destroy? But the evidence kept piling up. Laura's health continued to fail. She woke from her dreams weaker each morning, her strength ebbing away like sand through an hourglass. And in the villages round about, more reports of strange deaths drifted in. Always young women, always wasting away, always the same telltale horror of nightmares and mysterious weakness. It was then that Baron Vordenberg entered the story. He didn't just wander in uninvited. He was sought out after General Spielsdorf poured out his tale of Bertha's death. Laura's father, rattled and desperate for answers, turned to the one man in the region with the right combination of pedigree and peculiar knowledge, Baron Vordenberg. A scholar of the old shadowy lore, Vordenberg had spent his life buried in manuscripts, legends, and parish records. He wasn't just an armchair expert, though. He also carried a personal stake in the matter. He was a direct descendant of the Karnstein family itself, the very bloodline whispered to have bred more than one creature that cheated death. Talk about convenient casting. It's like having a haunting in your house and discovering the bloke down the road is not only a ghost hunter but also the great-great-grandson of the original ghost. Gothic literature loves this kind of coincidence. Vordenberg explained what the villagers had been whispering all along. The noble Karnsteins, once grand but long since decayed into ruin, were notorious for their vices and their strange legends. Among those stories was the persistent rumour that the family had dabbled in darker arts and produced more than one vampire. Their tombs, he said, still stood in the ruined chapel just down the road from Laura's own castle. Because of course they did. It's never, oh, the vampire crypt is hundreds of miles away. No, it's always, by the way, the undead are buried practically next door. Handy if you fancy a midnight stakeout. So, with Vordenberg's guidance, the grim picture became clear. Carmilla wasn't just an unusual guest with late mornings and headaches. She was part of the cursed Karnstein legacy. And if Laura had any hope of surviving, the answer wasn't in doctors or prayers. It was in torches, stakes, and the old rituals of the vampire hunters. The general, Laura's father, and the baron wasted little time. Armed with holy water, a priest, and grim determination, they made their way to the Karnstein ruins. By torchlight, they found the old vault, and within it a coffin, Carmilla's coffin. When they opened it, there she lay, not decayed, not reduced to dust like the centuries should have done, but as fresh and beautiful as if she had only just gone to sleep. Her lips still red, her cheeks still faintly flushed. Laura was spared the sight, but the men told her after what they had seen. With solemn prayers, they drove a stake through her heart. The body writhed and let out a dreadful cry, proof enough that death had at last reached the creature. They struck off her head, burned what remained, and scattered the ashes. Only then did they breathe easily, certain that the curse had been lifted. It's the standard vampire treatment, isn't it? None of this, let's talk about it, maybe she's misunderstood. Straight to hammer, stake, and fire. Mind you, when someone's been sucking the life out of your daughter, diplomacy probably isn't top of the list, and just like that, Carmilla was gone. The terror that had haunted Laura's nights ended with smoke rising from the old chapel ruins. But the story doesn't quite close there. Laura tells us that though her health returned, her spirit never fully did. The memory of Carmilla lingered, her beauty, her voice, her embrace, love and horror intertwined, haunting her long after the vampire's ashes had blown away. And isn't that the real sting of the tale? The ashes might be scattered, the vampire gone, but the memory, the hold, remains. Laura got her strength back, yes, but the weight of Carmilla's presence, the mix of affection and dread, stayed with her. That's the thing about toxic connections. You can end them, you can walk away, you can even drive a stake through them if it comes to that. But sometimes the imprint lingers. The echoes of what they gave you and what they took from you don't vanish overnight. Carmilla wasn't just a vampire in a coffin. She was a lesson in how dangerous it is to invite in the wrong person, how easily a lodger can become an emotional jailer. The story reminds us that survival isn't just about defeating the monster. It's about learning how to live after it's gone, without letting the memory keep draining you. Because that's the hardest part, isn't it? Letting go, not just of the person, but of the pull they had on you. You've been listening to Old Retold podcast. Classic stories abridged and brought to life once more. If you've enjoyed this tale, be sure to follow and join me again, where another timeless story waits to be retold. Until next time, pour a cuppa. Look out for another twiddly detail, where old stories play dress up in the present.